Thank you. And it's great to see so many of you here for our talk. And again, I'm Alex McAllister. I'm the coordinator of collection management at Appalachian State, and joined by Bobby Hollinsworth, who's research librarian at Clemson, and Alan Sherlin, who is a social sciences librarian at Appalachian State University. Again, we want to thank you for coming to our talk. I know this can sort of be a sensitive topic, sometimes maybe touchy, and so in the essence of that, we ask that, if you're not comfortable sharing your name or where you work, that's fine. But this is a lively luncheon, so we are hoping to have some great discussion. And we have also included a Padlet on your table with a QR code. If some of you don't have that, just raise your hand and maybe others can share. And we'll also put it on the screen. So, really our talk was initiated by a number of things, but one of those being sort of previous studies that have cited high turnover rates in libraries. And these turnover rates tend to be high not only with just librarians who are doing the everyday work, but also in administration, where you might find several leaders who would be sort of exiting the library for a number of reasons. And a major study that we looked at was by Finn and others, who found that one of the largest factors for this turnover is dissatisfaction with library administration, specifically direct supervisors. And you can see some of the numbers. 50% of librarians who were surveyed, and I believe there were several hundred surveyed, found that they were not satisfied with library administration. And about 50% also were not satisfied with the morale or the culture of the library. And one other study I do want to point to before I hand it over to Bobby is Alma C. Ortega's work, which is titled Academic Libraries and Toxic Leadership. This is a fascinating book. It incorporates all aspects of sort of traumatic experiences that librarians might feel they suffer, dissatisfaction with the workplace, how to heal from this. And so there's a section that really, I think, points to why we decided to take on this topic and bring it to Charleston Conference. And that's when Ortega discusses that many librarians felt their associations should step up and play a stronger role in creating better training for mid-career librarians. Confidentially, they dared to speak up and stated that mentoring efforts need to be extended beyond newly minted librarians or refined mentoring for already well-established library leaders. Mid-career librarians felt their association's efforts toward their mentoring and leadership needs, that they were virtually non-existent, which I think is fascinating. And one particular comment Ortega included from an interview said that the person said, "I encountered real resistance to any guidance or mentoring. In fact, it could be considered a closed door. They did not really want to deal with it. They wanted it to go away. I believe that as a library leader in higher education, the higher your aspirations, the more help you should seek. And in my experience, it was that the higher I went, the less help I found," which is really unfortunate if you think about that. But I'm going to hand it over to Bobby, and he will take us to the next slide, unless you want to add a comment on there.
Thanks, Alex. This slide is taken from Ortega's book, and what I wanted to show you is you go from good leadership, effective leadership, not so great, to bad, to toxic. Okay, and you can see right here of the this is the survey that Ortega put together. 488 respondents. Of those respondents, 319 had experienced some sort of toxic leader or supervisor. It's broken down by gender. So you can 65, almost 2/3 had experienced something, and you may have as well. But that's one of those things that I wanted to point out, just because the book, as we said, is a good example of how to deal with it, how to handle it, that sort of thing. So we can't say this without one other thing that we want to talk about, which is change. We all hear the word change, we all deal with change, and sometimes I think when people think of change, and people are resistant to change. They're like, you're a problem, you're a troublemaker, you just don't want to change. And I think the three of us are more on the lines of change is not a problem, change is to be changing is the problem, okay? And as you can see right here, this is from an old study that, actually just a Harvard Business Review from Robert Kelly from 1988, that he defined as far as, at the top here, you've got independent critical thinking. At the bottom, you've got dependent uncritical thinking, passive, and active. And the reason I bring this up is because I think, at least in my 28 years of being a librarian, everywhere I go, I can see where people kind of fall on this, all right? And the thing is, you've got over here, you've got alienated followers, those who have a problem. They might have a problem with something. They might raise a ruckus, but they're not going to challenge anybody. They're not going to. It's not. So they're high on the critical, but low on the they're not going to do anything. Okay, they're on the passive side over here. If you go around this way, you get the sheep. Obviously, passive, but also uncritical thinking. The yes people who are going to be active, but not critical thinking. You got survivors here in the middle who are just going to like, how do I get through this? How do I get to retirement? How do I get to the next place? Okay. Then up here you got the effective followers, and I would like to think everybody in here is effective follower. All right. And what I mean by that is, and follower is not a bad word. There's leadership. There's followers. Okay. The effective followers here are the ones who are going to be critical, the ones who are going to ask questions, question decisions. That's the whole point of this, and that's one of the reasons why I brought this slide in here, because I think it's very effective as far as showing where we fall. Three of us fall in this effective follower category. We care a lot, all right? And when decisions come down, we're not just going to, if there's issues with it, if there's problems, change, whatever, we're fine with change. It's just the reasons for change. Okay.
Great. So again, if you do not have access to the Padlet, please take a screenshot. If it doesn't work, we do have handouts on some of the tables. I apologize, we don't have one for each table, but you can raise your hand maybe and we'll come help you with that. And while I go to the Padlet, actually give me 1 second. We'll return to this at the end to give you time, but we do have some discussion questions and in general, and you may have questions of your own, thus the idea of this lively luncheon. So, in my years of coming to Charleston, the lively luncheons are typically in a smaller venue where it feels, more quaint. So this is a rather interesting room for the lively luncheon, but I do want to encourage you all to speak. We have a microphone up here, and again, there's no need to, if you're not comfortable with identifying yourself, or if you have questions in general, please ask. But also, we do have some questions, for the audience that we hope you will engage in, and one of those is, how has your work or a colleague's work been affected by leadership? And I'll just run through these, and feel free to come address any of them that you have an interest in. Have you ever considered leaving your job because of toxic leadership? How did you handle it? Or even, as Bobby said, just poor leadership, because not all leadership is toxic. And then we have a couple of questions for taking action. How can keeping the institution's leadership informed about a problem leader help? Apologize for the feedback. And what support can library conferences provide to create more leadership discussions? And really, I'd like to thank Charleston Conference for accepting this talk, because, in my years of coming to Charleston, I don't recall any leadership discussions or talks taking place. So I think it's a really important place, for these types of discussions to happen. Okay, and with that being said, the microphone's open. Feel free to raise your hand if you have ideas about what we just said.
Do you have the Padlet?
What's that?
Who has the Padlet?
And I do have the Padlet. Let me go ahead and bring that up while we wait.
The Padlet's available in case you are not wanting to speak, we can read them for you. No problem there if you wanna let us know what you're thinking.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
Quite a few responses. So with our initial question, what are some of the issues you see with leadership in your libraries from the Padlet? Hopefully you all can see this, but there's quite a few entries. Conflict averse, lack of communication, unclear decision making, favoritism, focusing on shiny projects and departments at the expense of resourcing core services. That's definitely one I think many librarians have experienced. A lack of vision, that's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of transparency comments, so lack of transparency, which is definitely, something that can be problematic. Especially if you're in a larger library, I would say that the transparency can definitely be an issue. Hesitancy to push back on university leadership. That's a rather interesting comment. If you think about, what would you do if you were, working under a difficult administration, there was no transparency. How might you work with university leadership to address that? And, I think that's something worth considering. Librarians, as Ortega states, have avenues if you're in an academic library where you have, vice provost, provost, and even the chancellor who wants to know of any concerns, because these are the university leaders. And if the library is failing or having major issues, the university then is having the same problems. So very important comment, that one I find. How much time do we have, Bobby?
Just want to remind everybody, if you want to speak, we've got a microphone up front. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've reached the stage of being emeritus, so I'm at the end of things, and I just wanted to share a couple of anecdotes about leadership. The first one I remember happened to me when I was at a relatively young age of 28, over-promoted because they were short of people, and made the medical librarian with my first big management job. And I was going to be cool and trendy, so I decided I was going to do things like I'd work at the issue desk in the evenings, and I would be one of the team and one of the group. And I did that for about 10 days, and then the head of the issue desk sacked me, because I didn't read the rules. I went to the issue desk in the evening, I didn't know what the answer was when somebody came with a problem, so I just made a decision. And the rest of the team had to spend the whole of the next day cleaning up the mess I'd left behind. So only for a week did I try to be one of the group. It's different from being one of the team, but being one of the group. And the other one, I don't know whether this applies to other people, but I always remember being proud of one's leader. And I can remember going to so many conferences when I was relatively young, and people would say to you, "Oh, who are you? What's your name? Where do you work?" And most people would say, "I work in Edinburgh University," or "I work in whatever the place was." But a lot of people who had really good leaders would say, "I work for Brenda Moon." Didn't say where they came from, they didn't have to, they just had to show pride in who their leader was. And the fact that that leader had some kind of presence all over the profession was something that you could take real pride in.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Couple more minutes. Anyone else? Yes.
Can you hear? Okay,
Yes.
good. What I thought was interesting was a couple of slides ago, actually, that the majority of the respondents to the survey in the article that you cited said that about 68 to 70% of the toxic leaders that they have experienced were women. And I wonder if the author gave any reasoning as to why that might be.
Not to my knowledge, and I thought the same thing as well, because it was interesting. but I didn't see, I don't remember that there was any, any acknowledgement of that or discussion about that in the book.
And I'll have to go back and check. I feel there might have been a couple of statements about that dynamic where, but I'd have to go back and check. It's a great question, and certainly one that I think we should follow up on. So thank you.
Do you have a question?
I'm only speaking for myself in my library, but I don't realize, even though we've done a strategic plan, I kind of feel like there's another plan underneath the plan, and I don't know what it is.
Back there.
Is it on? Okay. My name is Veronica, and I'm here because I want to make sure that I'm not the toxic leader as the library director. But I do appreciate the comment about there being a plan, because before I became a director, it's very complex. I thought, and I worked under what I would call toxic leaders, and I thought I could do a better job than that. But when you get into the situation, it's very complex. Sometimes you can't share things. Your provost says to you, this isn't for public consumption. It informs your thinking, but you're not allowed to share that with your staff. So I'm not making excuses, and I hope I'm not a toxic leader, but I do, that transparency thing, which I'm really dedicated to, isn't always available to the library leaders.
Thank you. Do we have another one back here? I thought I saw another hand.
Way back there.
Okay.
Farther back. I think your time is up.
Anybody have any other questions or comments? I know that we had a lot of the Padlet stuff up here, which is great, and I appreciate your participation. One of the things that I kind of mentioned it before was the idea of change and the resistance to change, and there are certainly librarians who don't want any change, and I think that's one of the things that the three of us, we've discussed it before, that change for the better, okay, great. Change for the sake of changing because we've got a new strategic plan. We've got to do this, whether it be the library, whether it be the university, whatever it might be. And it's like, it makes me always think, well, what was wrong with what we were doing? We were successful at that, and are we going to abandon that now to do this new thing? And that's what I think we kind of came together to do this presentation, because we were seeing this in our libraries, in our spaces. And what I mean by that is we were seeing the mission, or the mission critical, as we think of academic libraries, being that of, obviously supporting the curriculum and supporting the research of the faculty, students, and staff. And those are pretty simple mission there. And of course, we all have our own mission of our university library, what we're doing, our college library, whatever it might be. But those, I think, are the mission critical right there. And what we were seeing, the three of us, were, it pertained to collections. And collections being kind of relegated to the back seat because of everything else that was going on. And what I mean by that is, we need space for this. We need this. We need all these things, which in our, at least my perspective, we're pushing collections to further in the back seat. And let's be honest, collections aren't shiny. Collections aren't sexy sometimes. And I'll say it. And the thing is, when that happens, the university suffers, researchers suffer. We make sacrifices because of other things, and we don't do the things that put us on the map in the first place. We change our perspective, we change and once again, we're changing. But the thing is, our mission, which, it's one of those things where I think we all hold it pretty deeply. When you see that getting shifted around, and it's not our mission anymore, or somebody didn't tell us it's not our mission anymore, or nobody told us, and I think that's the frustrating part for us and some of the others in the room, I would assume. Yes, you got a question.
Yeah, so I've worked at App State, and now I work at Yale. So where you're seeing there's a lot more public services and not so much collections, and I'm the collection development collaborator. At Yale, I think there's the opposite problem, where there's not enough public services, and there's a lot of focus on collections. And working at other public institutions, I see the value of promoting and marketing those collections.
Yeah.
So it really depends on. I've worked at App State, and Yale is here in App State. It's here in terms of culture. At least it was when I was there. It's very it's not toxic leadership because university librarian, my boss, but it's a toxic culture because it's historical. So change is difficult.
Yeah.
And people come and go, but there's always going to be that person that was there for 60 years and says, we didn't do it like that in 1958, so we shouldn't change it now because that's our mission. So you have these there are big differences.
That's a great point, and the book brings that up as far as librarians who were met with resistance because they wanted, newer things. They wanted, whatever it might be, and they got resistance. They went somewhere else, somewhere where they could find a more progressive audience, a more progressive workforce, instead of the resistance to the new. So I think it goes both ways, and your point's absolutely taken, and it's brought up in the book, like I said, that you can. Exactly. You can suffer in either way, and I think that's a great point. Thank you. Anybody else have a question, comment? Yes.
They want to focus on spaces. They don't see the need for collection, but at the same time, I think the problem is they don't see the books getting checked out, but they don't really want to invest in I have a lot of colleagues who don't want to invest in the difficulties of understanding how to do an approval plan and an EDA and a push to DDA. They don't want to do all that mess. They didn't do it for 10 years, they don't want to do it now. And I'm having to find ways to say the collection is being used, not in this building, but it's being used, and we need to be pushing out virtual spaces and virtual for all of that electronic collection being used. That's what I'm struggling with. They want to give up on collection because they don't want to keep up with technology.
Right.
There seems to be two libraries in our conceptual idea of library. First of all, there's the invisible library, which is all the things that when knowledge comes from one person to another in whatever form it is. And then there's the physical library, which people are helping each other, and walking across the floor and using spaces and stuff. And I think we have to just embrace the idea we're dealing with two parallel realities in academic libraries, and we've got to keep our mind on both of them.
No, I think you bring up a great point, and it's a point that I'll make as well, because I don't know how many reference research librarians we have in the room, but there was a push, 10, 15 years ago to get rid of the reference desk. And either we were forced to do it or we did it on our own. Depends. Everybody was doing it. Everybody got rid of it. So now as a research librarian, as a reference librarian, we don't have a space anymore. I mean, most of our transactions are through email, through chat, through other, they don't see us. We're not seen anymore, and so it's one of those things where, and in doing this, other things came along that got a space. So they have a place now. We have no place, and it's just rubbed me wrong because it's like, we were always trying to get in and trying to do it, and we gave that up. And now we don't have it at all anymore. And I think it's one of the things that it's just one of these, name your, whether that be, I'm not going to name names, but name your space that came into the library that now has a space. I'll just leave it at that. And we don't have one anymore. And I think that's an interesting concept that has happened. Like I said, either we were forced or we did it willingly. but we gave it up. And the questions, and my point to that is the questions that we got, yes, the questions were definitely declining, but declining to a level of whatever the space. Did they get more questions than we got then? I don't know. Just from my experience, I don't see it. And I think it's one of the things that I've had to grapple with over the years is that, you've got these great collections, you've got this great expertise, and you kind of like put it in the background, and it kind of got moved. And that's just the way I see it. And you may disagree, and I'm fine with that, but that's just what I've seen. And like I said, 28 years of librarianship, that's what I've seen. So, yes.
I'm going to be the director apologist here for this because we've been in the same situation. Part of our job as library leaders is to advocate for the library and what it needs with the administration. And when your administration is shiny object-y and wants that space, it becomes a very difficult position to be in. And for me personally, I had very late career librarians who basically thought I was saying, I don't value what you do, which isn't true. I feel like the ultimate goal, or from my perspective, is we connect people with the information that they need when they need it. We have to do that in a variety of ways. We also got rid of our reference desk and we put in our writing center and our tutoring resource center. But the library still remains a pull organization, my library. So we want people to come in and pull the information out of us. The other organizations are push. They're sending out the information, and that's why they get more attention. So I've been trying to get my late career librarians to push that information. And then you will get a bigger piece of the pie, but it is a very difficult conversation to have because they built their careers. I built my career, it's been over 30 years, on the fact that I'm gonna sit at this desk, people are gonna ask me questions, and I'm gonna give them great service. And they do, they give them fantastic service. But when they're not seeking it, when they're not pulling it, they don't get anything.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Did you say your name was Monica? Veronica, sorry, Veronica. In meetings that are like exclusively directors, do they talk about this and then 3/4 of the people in the room are like, oh, I'm the toxic leader? I'm gonna guess no. Right? I mean, does any leader ever think that they are the toxic leader? I mean, ever? I mean, occasionally. But as a percentage of all the toxic leadership we think we see, right? So we're very good at justifying it. Yeah. So then I guess my question for those of us in the audience is, on the low end, maybe this kind of gets back to your quadrants. We can complain about it. We can take the extreme of quitting. What's in between those two?
It's a great question. I think from my perspective, anyway, and I don't want to hog the stage here, but from my perspective, I think it's one of those things where it depends on the dean, the director, or a unit head or whatever. It depends, what is going to be the reaction if you are critical? Is it total, shut down, you're ostracized, or is there give and take there? And I think that's another thing that we haven't brought up in here, but the change in leadership as well. The so much change, deans going from here to there to there to there, and you're like, okay, reorg number 5 coming in, and it's we've hit that fatigue, and I think that's what. I don't have an answer to your question, but I do think that there's, I'm not sure. And we can discuss this later. I think our time is about up.
I just want to jump in, Bobby. I do think, having open communication with the leaders is important, but also with your colleagues, because oftentimes what I've noticed is, certain colleagues may be detached from things that you're experiencing, right? And if for nothing else other than your own health, it's important to really share your experience about your workplace. I mean, this is where you think about it, spend so much of your time. So sharing out with colleagues, I think, is really crucial to this as well. And thank you so much for coming. We have another presentation, but we appreciate all the comments.
Thank you so much. And if you want to talk to us afterwards, we'll be here. So.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, or in this case, I guess, thank you for remaining. My name's Derek Hyatt. I am from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. That is not the big one in College Station. We are not the Aggies. We are the Islanders. The university is situated on Ward Island on Corpus Christi Bay. It's a smaller school, much smaller than College Station. Talking about the library a little bit, we have a growing collection of online books, just like everybody else. Some of the things I wanted to point out from this, there is a lot going on in the library right now. About a year before COVID hit, we opened a makerspace lab, and then just in this year alone, we have opened an AR/VR lab, as well as a learning commons where students can come and receive tutoring services, peer tutoring, I should say. In our last SACS COC accreditation process, as those of you who've been through that know, you have to propose a QEP, a quality enhancement plan. The one that our university proposed was information literacy, or specifically digital information literacy. And so it created a new department housed in the library, integrating information literacy into the curriculum. With all of this going on, we, like many others, are also dealing with staff vacancies, difficulty filling them. I'm happy to say that our 4 librarian vacancies will be down to 2 come January. So we do have a couple of offers made and accepted. With all of this stuff going on, we've been talking about change, and I just kind of want to point out 2 things. Number one, sometimes the change is thrust on you. None of us chose to have a global pandemic, but we've had a lot of scurrying about to figure out how to manage that. Another is that sometimes the change, like having a learning commons, is clearly for the good of the university. You know, this is a great opportunity. The students were using it before it was officially open. And I think that a lot of times the staff are willing to make changes as long as they understand them. They understand the need for them, and they can see that this is a good thing. Sorry, trying to figure out where the buttons are. In our library in particular, when I first started there about 7 years ago, periodicals and monograph acquisitions and cataloging were in 3 different departments. And if you're in any of those 3 areas, you might understand how that was really not working very well for us at the time. Largely because books were becoming more journal-like. We were starting to actually, we didn't have any ebook subscription packages at the time. I think because of that disconnect between the 2 departments. So in 2018, we combined these 3 units into a single department that we called Resource Management and Discovery. And I was the leader of that department, and I was telling the department at the time, the way we're structured right now is going to change, most likely. Just kind of, we put it together the best way we could figure out, but they understood that after we've done this for a little bit, we might see better ways of organizing. And so, sure enough, about 2 years later, we reorganized and created a couple of new positions out of old ones. We had one position that was in charge of processing the physical books as they came into the library. Another position was in charge of processing the periodicals, the print periodicals that came in. And so the volume of both of those was decreasing. It made a lot of sense to combine that into one person in charge of physical processing, supervising our student workforce as well. And I'll talk about this toward the end a little more, but I saw a need to have someone whose specific role was going through usage stats, generating reports, all the reports that we have to produce, the iPads and the ACRL reports and so on. So we created a position for that. And then this year, we switched our main book vendor. I should say, actually, back in 2019, we migrated to Alma. And so this year we integrated Rialto, which is a ProQuest book ordering service that integrates into the ILS, which totally changes our workflows. It's going to decrease our copy cataloging needs. And so in this case, what we did is I won't get into it too much, but we created a discovery specialist position that is both copy cataloging and e-resource knowledge base maintenance. And we were able to swap one full-time position in our department with a part-time position in another department and create an institutional repository specialist so that our scholarly communication librarian had more time for higher level work instead of just working on the IR. So through all of this, it's a lot of reorganizing, but I keep talking to my department about this. Are you okay with this? And we've gotten to a point where in our department, we don't think of it as reorganizing. We're just organizing. We're figuring out what's the best workflow, and then we're getting to the point where we can do that. And sorry, I don't know if that's distracting to you, but it is to me. And so the purpose of this presentation is to talk about how we got to that point. How did we get to where we're so comfortable with this sort of process that we don't think of it as reorganizing? In this book, Good to Great, by Jim Collins. I read this book in library school. I took a management class, and the author had written a book about companies called Built to Last, and it was about all these great businesses and what made them great. And a colleague told him, that book is great, but it's absolutely useless because most of us aren't in a great company. We're in a good company, and how do we become great? How do we transform? And so this book is about the companies who had started off as run-of-the-mill companies and had a transformation that became great. And Collins says that they expected, as they did the research, to find that there was a great leader who came into the company and took over and set a new vision, a new direction for the company, and then said, okay, now let's assemble our team to take it there. He said the exact opposite was true. What they found was that first, the executives assembled their team. They got together the people that they wanted in their company. And then that team decided what direction to take them. So the first step is the people. He used the analogy of a bus. I've got a handout that I hope most of you have. And this quote is on that handout. The first step is to get the right people on the bus. And the problem is, or the reason is, what happens if you decide the direction for the company and then you find out after you've assembled your team that that's not the right direction? And if they've gotten on because they want to go that particular way, then you've lost your workforce. But if they're there because they want to do great things with you, and they're along for the ride, so to speak, then it doesn't matter what direction you have to take the bus. Does that make sense? For me, that then raises the question of who are the right people? And I'm talking a lot slower than I thought I would, so let's talk about this though. I propose that the right people are the people who share your organization's values and strive for excellence in those values. So how do you identify them? In the book, Good to Great, Colin says that those companies who became great placed a greater weight on character attributes than they did on specific educational background or skills or job experience. But how do you figure out those character attributes? What I want you to do now, I'm going to put you to work in your small groups, just at your tables. Talk about, each of you try to identify one attribute that you look for in your organization. What would make a person the right person? And what's a good job interview question that'll get at that? I'll give you an example to kind of get the juices flowing. I like problem solvers, and I like to propose a problem to them and see how they resolve it. What I tell them is I give them an assignment, theoretically. So you've been given this assignment to sort through a box of things, objects, and written descriptions of 3 categories, and you have to sort those objects into your 3 categories. About halfway through, you come across one that doesn't fit any of your written categories. What do you do with it? There's no right or wrong answer here. Oh, there might be some wrong answers. But the point is to find out, how do they solve a problem of ambiguous directions? Which also might tell you something about how well I give instructions. So please talk about that at your tables. I'll give you a few minutes to just kind of come up with what would be a good job interview question to get at an attribute that's important to your organization. And then we'll share back with the whole group. Does anybody have any job interview questions that you'd like to share with the group? Oh, I think I'm a little too early. Sorry. Okay, let's circle back to the group now, if you don't mind. I'm thinking this is good. They're happy discussing, so they All right. Did any table come up with a really good, juicy job interview question to share with the group? Did anybody feel stymied? Like, I've got an attribute and I don't know what to ask? Okay, shall we move on then? Right, thank you for participating in that. I hope that you were able to get something out of that, get some ideas. Before I move on, I do want to acknowledge one other thing on here, which I can talk more about at the end if there's time, and that's getting the wrong people off the bus. That can be very difficult. I've had to do that myself. In one of those reorganizations, I inherited an employee who was underperforming and had for years, and everybody knew it and nobody had done anything about it. And my advice in situations like that is don't lower your standards. Keep your standards as high for the underperformers as you do for your star performers, because otherwise you end up punishing your star performers by giving them more work to do and rewarding the underperformers for underperforming. So please try to avoid that. Yes.
So what do you do when you're underperformer, you lose them, you can't ever replace them?
Hiring freezes. I think that is the question you have to ask. And I was asked that question, actually. Our Equal Employment officer asked me before we terminated an employee. He said, you realize there's a hiring freeze. You may not be able to replace this person. And honestly, sometimes that's an improvement. That's the balancing act you have to play. Personally, I think it's worth it to still get them off the bus because of the part about punishing your star performers. If you keep the underperformers on the team, you're going to alienate the good ones. Collins actually tells a story at Nucor, steel production company, where the standards were so high, the expectations, the production requirements were so high that employees actually chased a lazy employee off the lot, out of the plant. So hopefully we don't get that extreme, but it's that important. All right. Really quickly on this one, try to think in terms of the individual job functions, rather than your unit should be a specific job responsibility, not the position. What I've done a couple of times is literally print out the job description and cut it into strips, and then put the strips in a pile on the table and told the team, okay, let's organize these into different positions. And then in this case, I did that virtually with color coding and a different box for different positions and moving things from one to the other. But the point is here, thinking in terms of where does it make the most sense in the workflow for this piece of the workflow to go. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is identifying gaps in the workflow. There's a story behind this one. One day I was just kind of sitting at my desk, frustrated at not being able to spend time working on department goals. I was supposed to have turned in department goals. I was late with that. Figuring out, just thinking strategically about the department, and I felt like I was too swamped to get to that. Anybody else ever feel swamped and can't get to the important stuff? So what I did was I just started writing down, made a list of all the things that I wished I could do. What were those important things? I identified them. And then I made another list of what's stopping me, what's getting in the way of doing those. The big what's getting in the way, won't surprise many of you, was Excel spreadsheets. I was spending so much time gathering and analyzing usage stats, or comparing this title list to that title list and using VLOOKUP and pivot tables. And that led to the creation of a new position in our department. I mentioned the collections analyst before. So now I can say, hey, Joe, can you run me a list of whatever? So what I want to do for a couple of minutes here, another activity but not so interactive, I want each of you to make a list. We don't have a lot of time, so this won't be an exhaustive list. You can use the back of your handout if you don't have paper. If you don't have anything to write with, sorry, I didn't bring golf pencils. But make a list of what you wish you could be doing. What are the things that you wish you could give more love to? And then make another list of what's getting in the way of it. And due to time, we only have a couple of minutes to do this, so that's why it won't be an exhaustive list. The question for each of you, as you look at column B, as you look at the list of things getting in the way, can any of them just be stopped outright? Can any of them be given to another employee? whether someone you supervise or someone lateral, and you can seek permission to move that to another employee. If the answer to both of those questions is no, if it must be done and it must be you doing it, it's time to have a talk with your supervisor and let your supervisor know that you're swamped, that you have more than 40 hours a week worth of work, and something's got to give. And right now, it needs to be a frank discussion of here's what's not getting done, and here's why. And hopefully the supervisor can then, it's on them. The prioritizing becomes the supervisor's job, right? Okay. In the few minutes left, I will go to this list of all the other strategies that I came up with, including ones that we didn't have time to talk about in here. Do any of you have any questions for me or for the group about the ones we did talk about or about any that are on the list? This list is also on your handout with a few other ideas mixed in. Any other things on the list that you don't quite understand, that you want me to explain more about?
Well, this is just quick. Once you identify your functional gaps, what do you do?
You strategize. It's probably not going to be an immediate solution. Like I said, in my case, it led to the creation of this new position, another reorganization that we didn't think, it was just a new assignment for people. We took an existing position. In this case, it was our acquisition specialist. We honestly weren't doing a lot of firm ordering anymore, and so we just took that position and made it a collections analyst position. It was the same job level, so it didn't have a budgetary impact. Just swapped it out. So you have to start thinking strategically about it and what can I do to resolve this. And like I said, talk to your supervisor about the things that are getting in the way of the more important things. Other questions or closing thoughts? All right. Thank you again for coming and for your attention and for participating. I believe we do have a few more copies of the handout if any of you didn't get that up here at the front. Thank you.